The digital age was going to democratize the world. Access to information would no longer be the purview of elites and experts alone. But now that we're living in the multiverse of news, data, analysis, and opinion, it turns out to be a world with fake news, echo chambers, and deep distrust of media. Joining us now to consider journalism in a post-fact world, in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Zeynep Tufekci. She is contributing opinion writer for the New York Times and professor at the University of North Carolina's School of Information and Library Science. In New York, New York, Jay Rosen, professor of journalism at New York University, that's him on the right, and Craig Silverman, founding editor at BuzzFeed Canada. And here in studio, John Stackhouse, former editor-in-chief at the Globe and Mail, now senior vice president in the office of the CEO at the Royal Bank of Canada, and Janice Neal, chair of the Ryerson School of Journalism. And we're delighted to welcome all five of you to our program here on TVO tonight. I want to start our discussion by reading something that David Remnick wrote in the New Yorker magazine. Here he is quoting President Obama before and after the election. Here's an excerpt from that piece. The new media ecosystem, Obama is quoted as saying, means everything is true and nothing is true. An explanation of climate change from a Nobel Prize-winning physicist looks exactly the same on your Facebook page as the denial of climate change by somebody on the Koch brothers' payroll, and the capacity to disseminate misinformation, wild conspiracy theories to paint the opposition in wildly negative light without any rebuttal, that has accelerated in ways that much more sharply polarize the electorate and make it very difficult to have a common conversation. Okay, let's get into this. Jay Rosen, to you first. The new media ecosystem, the president says, where everything is true and nothing is true. That's his view. How would you characterize it?
Well, I think we should call it an open system where the gatekeepers who used to be able to keep stories without any factual basis out of the news stream no longer exist. And people not only read and select what they want, but are mini broadcasters themselves in their ability to share and pass along what they regard as news. And so the cultural authorities that once ruled over public discussion and allowed certain things into public discourse and kept other things out no longer exist. And so we're learning how to navigate a very different information environment, and we're learning that it has a very dark side to it.
Craig, if journalism were a patient, what diagnosis would you give it in 2016?
I would say in some ways it's a patient that perhaps is in rehab to a certain extent. The way it lived before may change in the way it has to live now. And I think, some people might use the words that it's in a crisis. Some people might say that, we have to rethink everything. There are a lot of fundamentals of journalism that still hold true and that are still important about being fact-based and evidence-based. But this world that I think was well described by that quote from President Obama has changed dramatically. And it's true that before someone might choose which newspaper to read on any given day and which television program to watch to get their news, when they get their news from Facebook, everything does kind of look the same. You don't necessarily see the source and the logos standing out to you. And so for people, what they're reacting to are the thumbnail image and the headline. And the more extreme those are and the more they appeal to your views and your beliefs, the more likely you are to click them. And that's changing the media environment drastically. And I think journalists have to think about how we reach people in that world. And also, in particular, with Trump coming into power, how we deal with a leader who consistently says things that are not true.
Zeynep, build on that if you would. What has gone wrong with the way we get and consume information?
Well, to point out the obvious, I guess, that this is building on a simmering of mistrust in all institutions, and it's a failure of politics. So it predates the internet, to speak. It starts with cable TV, perhaps. It starts with failure of electoral democracies to represent their population's interests. It comes, what happened, though, is that in the simmering bed of discontent and existing failure of institutions and gatekeepers, as Jay was saying, we have poured gasoline through this ecosystem, especially social media. We're talking platforms like Facebook, we're talking platforms like Twitter to some degree. For example, Facebook's motto is to strive for an open and connected world. Well, any historian would tell you, open to what? connecting whom? That's not something that's obviously good. It's not even neutral. So what we have perhaps opened up ourselves to is a lot of ethnic hatred. We have connected people who are white supremacists. We have in places, I know everybody likes to discuss United States and Europe, but in places like Myanmar, formerly Burma, BuzzFeed just had a report on how Facebook was helping fuel viral misinformation that fed into existing ethnic cleansing. So what needs to happen here is the open and connected is not this neutral value. And it also needs to recognize that it's not just the information ecosystem that's failed us. The failure is feeding on global discontent, failure of elites, failure of democracy, existing authoritarianism, and it's just pouring gasoline on this existing fire. It's a very tough situation.
Janice and John, I wanted to let our American friends go first because certainly I think it's the view north of the border that they are in the midst of an existential crisis down there when it comes to all of these issues. And I guess I want to get a sense from you two whether that's the case here in Canada. Janice, you first.
The existential crisis? Not sure. I mean, first of all, these are huge issues that we are kind of piling on the shoulders of journalism. In journalism, and let's separate that a little bit from the journalism industry, which we can chat about. But in a lot of ways, journalism has never been healthier. Journalists have more tools at their disposal. They have better avenues to investigate. They're doing data crunching. The kind of work that that Craig is doing in terms of investigating is being able to pour information out there for the public, to be able to consume. So that's one part of it. It is this completely unfettered world of information that disguises itself, puts on this costume of journalism that is really so much of a problem. And and as journalists, I think it's our job to stand back from that and obviously investigate it. But I don't think we have to carry the entire burden of all of this.
And I should just say, before going to you, John, that I didn't mean to suggest that Craig had suddenly taken out American citizenship, but he is down there in New York right now, so I sort of wanted to let our friends on satellite start first. But where would you follow up on that, John?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd agree entirely with Janice, but I would add a couple of things. First of all, the United States is unique. It's a unique political culture, always has been, and it's a unique media culture. And we shouldn't be terribly shocked that we've ended up in this place, or that America has ended up in this place. This is the country that thrived on conspiratorial news in the 19th century. It was the country that gave us Roswell. It was the country that created the National Enquirer. So we're seeing a continuation of that at an extreme now because of digital technology. And with that in mind, I would say we don't face a crisis of journalism globally, although there are parts of journalism that are in crisis. We have a crisis of engineering. This is an engineering problem.
What does that mean?
This is largely driven by Facebook and Google, and they're aware of this. They have created algorithms that determine what we read, what we see atop our feeds or on our home screens. And for the most part, algorithms make our lives better. They make a lot of things way more convenient. But the challenge that we collectively face, and the engineering giants critically face, is that these algorithms increasingly are being written through machine learning. They're being crafted by robots. It's not even human-driven anymore. And these firms, they know this, have to come to grips with this challenge.
Human values are being used to program these things. No?
Initially, the humans start this, but the machines learn from our habits, and they adapt or modify the algorithms for each of us as we just continue. Every time we use our phones, a machine is learning that we like this or that, or that people like us prefer this over that. And in many cases, that's wonderful. But it also comes with a great risk, which is, I think, what we're trying to wrestle with here.
I want to pick up on this 19th century angle that you just raised. And Jay, I'll go to you with this because that suggests this isn't all that new. And as one looks back, I guess the word of the year in 2016 was post-truth. But again, if you go back 10 years ago, truthiness was a new thing. So as we explore whether or not this is a truly new phenomenon, it sounds like it isn't. Is that fair to say?
Well, many of these problems have been building for a long time. The economic crisis in journalism has been gathering steam since around 2000. The erosion of trust in the United States press has really been a trend since the mid-70s. The erosion of respect and authority for democratic institutions is a long-term trend. There's always been crazy, paranoid news sources and conspiracy thinking in the United States. That's a part of its political culture. Several things, though, that are of more recent vintage and need to be isolated are, I think, political journalism in the United States, and I don't think the situation in Canada is much different from what my friends there tell me, took a wrong turn many years ago when it started to focus itself primarily on the inside game and the machinations of the political class, and started to look upon the voters as objects to be manipulated, and even worse, began to invite its own audience into appreciating politics from the point of view of the managers, spin doctors, operatives, and other professionals whose job was to win over the public. And I think that style of political coverage, which goes back about 20 years, contributed to this crisis. Also, we have to mention here that Donald Trump, as a figure and as a candidate and as somebody who burst onto the political scene, has been an innovator in politics. He has not only broken the rules, he's smashed democratic norms to bits, and nobody in the political media in the United States was prepared for that. Trump did hundreds and hundreds of things that in the minds of political journalists would have sunk another campaign. So we have to credit him also as an almost unique figure who came along and smashed this system.
Craig, let me pick up with you on that one. And to that end, they used to say, don't get into a fight with anybody who buys, newsprint by the ton or ink by the barrel or that kind of thing. But clearly, as Jay just said, Donald Trump has just thumbed his nose at those rules and gotten away with it. Here's a stat that I'd like you to react to. Trust for mass media is at an all-time low in the United States. According to a Gallup poll in September, only 32% of respondents said they have, quote, a great deal or a fair amount of trust in mass media. And, Craig, you obviously don't represent mass media or the legacy media here today, so I want your sense about why so much distrust of the mainstream media.
Well, I think as Jay mentioned, that lowering of trust has happened over several decades, and it's happening to not just the media, but to many institutions in Western society as a whole. So I think there is a larger trend going on there. And when you combine that, I think, with the approach, for example, that Donald Trump has taken, which was, to not only kind of avoid mainstream media in many cases, but to actually demonize it and hold it up as something to be ridiculed as part of his campaign, he appealed to that mistrust, I think, very well in his campaign. And then the other thing that happened is, he and his advisors realized that, they could go around the mainstream media. And they put a huge amount of effort into Facebook. They spent a lot of money targeting people on Facebook to build up an audience who were passionate about Donald Trump, to engage that audience, to build a database on them. And the other thing that was interesting about Trump, which I think also goes to him attacking this low level of trust, is that he didn't build up a huge campaign organization like you would see in the past and like traditional campaigns had. In fact, I feel like he ceded a lot of ground to independent people, folks on the alt-right and in other corners who decided to kind of pick up the flag and every day wake up and try to create a meme or create a hashtag in favor of Trump or that demonized Hillary Clinton. And so it was interesting to see, I think, that decline in trust created an opening that he's exploited. He held up journalists to ridicule, and he encouraged his supporters to kind of fill in the gaps there and to take on a campaign for him and attract and appeal to people who were supporters. And I think it was very effective and happened because of that low level of trust.
Steve, if I could add just one thing.
Let's go Jay and then Janice.
What's a little bit worse even than Craig said, in the sense that Trump figured out a way to profit from negative press attention that came to him with some of the wild accusations he made and some of the unreliable statements that he let out there. There was a way in which the attempt to check him and to correct him actually fed his support.
Janice.
I just want to say, first of all, I mean, regarding the polling about, trusting the media, I want to be a little bit cautious and a little bit suspicious that that actually represents what people's consumption of news.
You're suspicious of this
I'm
number?
suspicious of it because I think people don't actually, a lot of readers, a lot of audiences are not tracking consciously exactly what it is they're reading. So if you're sitting there with your phone and you're taking the subway and you're kind of going in and out and you're losing signals and stories just keep flipping by, first of all, you're probably just grabbing the headline. Secondly, you aren't necessarily seeing that's from the Washington Post and the New York Times. To you, you're reading it on Facebook. So when you say what is it that you believe? Well, I believe what's on Facebook. That could be everything from your crazy aunt in Arkansas who's commented on a story to actual media stories that are being consumed and being published on Facebook. So I'm just being a little, I'm not trying to sound Pollyannish, but I'm a little bit skeptical of that. I find it difficult, and I've been in journalism my whole life, and I sometimes find it difficult to keep track of where my information's coming from. If my phone rang and it's Mr. Gallup on the phone, I'm not quite sure I'd be able to kind of go back and do all that. So, I'm just being a little bit cautious.
No,
here.
fair enough.
Okay.
John and Zainab.
But we know that we're all more inclined to read information, including news that is recommended or shared by our friends, than by traditional institutions. That has been among the game changers, that our social circles and the algorithms determine what we're likely to read or what will pop up on your screen. It used to be a news organization could determine that for you.
Zainab.
Can obviously, I think there's a Facebook angle where you already have a sweet tooth, right? And Facebook drops candy in front of you, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So I think that's the situation, is that there are natural human tendencies to want to read stuff that confirm our biases. Facebook helps us find them either through friends we like or by somewhat promoting stories we're more likely to click on. So I think that's very true. And it also helped defund journalism by gobbling up the ad dollars. That's also true. But I do think Jay's point is very important if we're discussing what's wrong and how journalism failed and why people don't trust it. If you look at what they do as a practice, maybe for 20 years, and if you look at it in the context of this election, for example, WikiLeaks got a trove of Hillary Clinton's campaign emails. And it played to journalism process weaknesses. It dropped little batches of emails like once every week. There was no technical reason. I'm a programmer. They could have all been dropped at once. But what they did was they dropped it week at a time. So there was this continuous availability of juicy gossip. Insider gossip of exactly the kind that Jay is talking about, that is of interest to historians, but that was really not of interest. 99% of what got reported on it was of no interest to this current election. I saw on the front page of Washington Post, for example, last month of this election, some Huffington Post blogger had emailed Clinton's campaign manager about Bernie Sanders. 1 month to an election between Clinton and Trump, and this is what Washington Post is discussing. I looked at, on LexisNexis, a database that looks at these, what media covers, I looked at New York Times, Washington Post, and Politico, thinking these are your best case scenarios. This isn't even cable news. And I found that Clinton's email server stories, roughly speaking, outnumbered Donald Trump's business interests and potential conflicts of interest stories 5-1. I mean, we have an unprecedented candidate running a business empire, has never happened in hundreds of years of the United States history, and it got 20% of the coverage of Hillary Clinton's email server and all the WikiLeaks drops that were, I guess, like the candy to journalism who couldn't resist it. Politico had this running blog, what did we find in WikiLeaks today? I think mass media and journalism, and I'm not even talking about cable TV that plays the politics of gotcha, which this is why people distrust it. It doesn't cover policy. It covers like, did you misspeak in one little word and let's have 24 hours to fill. I think even the best outlets we have, the ones that do very good work, I want to be clear, there are wonderful journalists out there and there are wonderful stories that come out of it, have, for the longest time, failed us. Why did it take Donald Trump's rise to cover what was going on after deindustrialization in the United States?
So let me-
Why is the, yeah, all of these things, these are why people don't trust the media. It's the politics of gotcha, it's the inside baseball stuff, it's publishing whatever's in front of you, not covering people's things. And also that doesn't mean, on the one hand, on the other hand, journalism that leaves you confused on what's what. Well, if everything is confusing and New York Times and Washington Post and cable news won't tell you on the one hand, on the other hand, I might as well listen to my aunt in Arkansas if there's not going to be something different there.
Well, you've
that
anticipated
tells me,
my next question.
Here's what you need to do.
That's it. Well, Craig, I guess that does anticipate the next question. Does that help explain why Aunt Mildred in Arkansas is as valued and trusted a source of gravitas and, news judgment as the Washington Post or the New York Times these days?
I mean, I think we're always looking for clarity and looking for understanding, and naturally humans gravitate towards people we trust for information. If you look at studies that have been done around the spread of rumors and other things, we tend to believe information that comes from people that we have close ties to. That's a fundamental human behavior. We also tend to believe information that conforms to things we already suspect or we already believe. That's also fundamental human behavior. And the interesting thing, Zeynep was talking about the WikiLeaks leaks of the emails from the Clinton campaign. One of the things that I saw, paying very close attention to the spread of misinformation during the election, was that a lot of really crazy conspiracy theories and a lot of completely false claims would take those true emails from the WikiLeaks links and then use them as the basis to invent something completely false. And so what they actually served was a sort of factual grounding for people who wanted to create false things to spin them up. And if you are seeing that from someone you trust, from someone who's close to you on Facebook, and in a lot of cases, our friends on Facebook have similar views to us, because again, that's what humans crave. It's confirming information, it's coming from someone with close ties, it's cutting through and giving you something that maybe is a little bit juicy. You're probably going to glom onto that, and you're probably going to believe it. And I think that happened at a massive scale this election.
Let's just before Zeynep, just before you get in there, hang on, because I don't want to let this point go away, because we've got a board that reflects this. We want to show 3 fake headlines of fake stories that went around the world before the truth had a chance to put its pants on, as the old expression goes. Pope Francis shocks world, endorses Donald Trump for president, releases statement. There was another one. WikiLeaks confirms Hillary sold weapons to ISIS, then drops another bombshell. Breaking news. That's from the Political Insider, whatever that is. And then here's a third one. It's over. Hillary's ISIS email just leaked, and it's worse than anyone could have imagined. I need to know, John, you put out a daily newspaper for many years. I want to know how these, what would seem to me to be self-evidently fake, phony, completely impossible to believe headlines and stories were presumably taken as gospel by so many people.
So among the many things that have changed is the economics of advertising through social media. So you can now make pretty good money generating artificial news, fake news. And a whole bunch of people in basements around the world have surprised many of us by making a lot of money generating these juicy headlines that are laughably false. But this is what the National Enquirer did for decades. It's just now become a cottage industry or a basement industry where you're able to do it from Macedonia or some other far-flung part of the world.
But we know what the
and make thousands of dollars per headline.
But we know what the National Enquirer is. We understand that brand. The Political Insider, that sounds legit. There's other, the Denver Bugle or whatever the name of these things are. That sounds legit. How are people supposed to know, Janice, the difference between the real deal and this phony baloney stuff?
You mean, how are people supposed to know? Yeah, they're supposed to engage, they're supposed to engage their critical thinking. They're supposed to read beyond the headline. I haven't read those stories, so I'm not sure how far down into the story it would take me before I'd start going, this is absolute, before it would run counter to my common sense. As we know, common sense not necessarily so common. So that is how people are supposed to know. We can talk about media literacy or, the lack of media literacy, within civics classes and, in high school and, in elementary school. But they obviously these fake news sites and the names are coming in a vacuum to some degree of people putting aside their traditional news sources.
Now, Jay, Mark Zuckerberg insists that this didn't turn the election at all, and I want to read a quote of his in which he says, of all the content on Facebook, more than 99% of what people see as authentic. Only a very small amount is fake news and hoaxes. The hoaxes that do exist are not limited to one partisan view or even to politics. Overall, this makes it extremely unlikely hoaxes change the outcome of this election in one direction or the other. Is the founder of Facebook, in your view, Jay, right about that?
Well, that was a very embarrassing statement that Zuckerberg made for the simple reason that all the people who work for him are like really good at math, and every one of them could determine that 1% of the material on Facebook could be fake and 40% of what's shared could be faked. So the statistic he cited was not only meaningless, it was actively misleading. However, one part of that quote, I think, gets at something really important, where he said that hoaxes are sort of equally seen on the left and the right. And I think when people talk about fake news, they almost always focus on the supply side, the people who are creating it, why they're creating it, as John just said, that the financial incentive for them to do so. We very rarely look at the demand side. And in particular, I don't think we understand, I don't think anyone wants to talk about, why is the demand for fake news greater on the right than the left? Not exclusively so. There is demand for it on the left. There is a tendency in human beings, as we've said, to seek out news that confirms our worldview, and that exists on the left and the right. But this phenomena of fake news, as Craig can say from his own studies and other studies have confirmed this, is much stronger on the right than the left. The creators of it have testified that it's harder to get liberals to share these things than conservatives. I don't think we know why that is. I think we want to avoid discussing that, and I think Zuckerberg in particular is terrified that there might be an imbalance like that, and he wants to make sure that he never has to deal with that because it's too explosive.
Well, let's not avoid it here. John?
Well, I think we do understand a little bit why it has always been more dominant on the right than on the left. The conspiratorial theories have always been multiple bigger on the right than on the left. It's because the right, especially in America, is informed by a libertarian anti-establishment streak. So anything that feeds that there's an establishment that must be brought down, this goes back to the American Revolution, it will find a significant audience in the U.S. And the beauty of the U.S. is it's a very tribal society, but it has mass in a way that very few markets in the world do. So you can go after a niche, a political view in the U.S., and create a very significant following with it. You look at Alex Jones, who has a radio program in the U.S. This is a guy who continues to argue that 9/11 was a conspiracy theory, that Sandy Hook was a hoax. He has 5 million listeners to his
And his
show.
stuff is unhinged. I mean, it's embarrassing to listen to that stuff.
But a significant following, 5 million people. That's not a Facebook phenomenon, right? That is much closer to the mainstream probably than we want to admit.
Well, let me play some tape here that, I guess it's not tape anymore, sorry. Let me ask our director to roll our server and put this digital content out there. This is from Saturday Night Live on the whole filter bubble in which we all live, where we want to only listen to what we and like-minded people believe and are not sort of susceptible or interested in alternative views. Sheldon, would you roll that, please?
Welcome to The Bubble. Coming in January 2017, The Bubble is a planned community of like-minded freethinkers, and no one else.
So if you're an open-minded person, come here and close yourself in.
In here, it's like the election never happened.
While who knows what the hell is happening outside in their America, The Bubble will be a fully functioning city-state.
With things everybody loves, like hybrid cars, used bookstores, and small farms with the rawest milk you've ever tasted.
That's more like it. Even though you're in The Bubble, you'll still stay fully connected to the world outside.
We've streamlined our high-speed internet with only the good sites, like HuffPo, Daily Kos, Netflix documentaries about sushi rice.
Anyway, on and on it goes. Zainab, I want to get your take on why you think people are so, it's even more than content. They're almost adamant nowadays about living inside their own bubbles. How come?
Well, It's a very natural human tendency, as we kept discussing, to want to believe things that further what you already believe. But here, Facebook and Google have a very key role to play, and I think traditional journalism too, in fostering this, because it's financially lucrative to serve content to these algorithmically amplified and entrenched echo chambers, these bubbles. And to go back to Zuckerberg's statement, it's on face value not correct. I wrote a piece in the New York Times called Mark Zuckerberg is in Denial, because if you look at Facebook's own research, it's very clear what people see there can affect their behavior, including their voting behavior. This is from Facebook's research. It can influence their mood. So what we have is we have a country that feels that it's not served. Large chunks of the country feels that it's not served by the existing system, and they have certain set of beliefs that have been fed by politicians, that have been fueled. It started with for Donald Trump's political career, it started with Barack Obama questioning his citizenship, right? So there's certain beliefs have been fueled by politicians and enabled by a lot of politicians who might not even believe it, because they thought, hey, this will burn the other party, but when there's a fire, it burns everyone. And then Facebook and Google too, through their ad network, made this very lucrative to focus exactly in these bubbles. Well, I don't want to call it bubbles. These are normal human clumpings. And then, as you see this stuff, as you keep seeing, for example, this kind of fake news, Hillary Clinton killed an FBI agent, and on, and this goes on for 9 months, this goes on for a year. At one point, even if you don't completely believe what you have heard, and Facebook makes no effort so far to label these sites properly, to algorithmically try to eliminate them, which they could have done. They could have at least dampened them. They could have paired them with fact-checking sites. They could have suggested things that countered it. There's a lot they could do. They did nothing. So you're kind of consuming this for 9 months, 10 months, and at that point, you may not really know what to believe in. You may just be confused, and you may be believing the candidates are all equally shady, or some is more shady. You don't really have a means to make a decision. And then we saw a large number of undecided people very late into the game, much more so. And I hope somebody does some polling of people's beliefs, we find that there's an enormous amount of, I don't mean just sort of partisan views. I mean flat out false, fake, not true views.
Right. Let me do another poll here. Since you raised public
large
opinion
numbers of
polling, let me
people.
try another poll here. And Janice, I'll bring you in because I want to do another Canadian and American comparison here. Sheldon, stat board number 2. In Canada, our trust in media numbers are different. According to an Environics communications survey this year, 54% of Canadians, remember it was 32 of Americans, 54% of Canadians said they could trust news media outlets. It found people trust the media more than they trust their own bosses, their mayors, the prime minister, or any corporations. We've had 2 consequential elections in the last 13 months in North America. They got Trump, we got Trudeau. You couldn't have 2 more different politicians. Does it suggest, and I don't want to sound smug about it, I really don't want to sound smug about this.
Yeah, we got to be careful.
Yeah, no kidding. Does it suggest we're a little more immune to what's going on that we're talking about here in Canada than they are in the States?
I mean, perhaps we can start off from that, but suggest that we're more immune because we've never had the polarization, and while certainly there have been lots of spots that there has been, it hasn't been divisive. It was never fanned by cable TV, as we've referred to a couple times. I haven't really talked about it. Even when we had a television channel that was very conservative, it was determined to kind of promote the conservative view. It failed to gather an audience. It failed, and it was mild compared to anything that you would see on Fox or even on some of the shooting matches on the other shows. We're sitting here very civilly right now. We haven't that's
what we do here.
Yelling and screaming. Yeah,
that's what we insist on here.
Yeah. Well, but it isn't just TV. I mean, this is Canadian society. We are reflecting, to some degree, the civil society and a more civil society, I suppose. So I think, but yeah, you said, we have to be careful about not being too smug. And while I was, somewhat, skeptical, or I wanted to be cautious about the trust figures in the American media. I can't now turn around and say, well, they must be right in Canada. So, I still kind of, come at it from that perspective. But I do believe that Canadians, to get Canadian news, you are going to have to rely more on Canadian news sources than everything, all the, fake or otherwise sources that are out there.
We've got about 5 minutes left, so let me get some quick answers from everybody on this last go-round here. I want to know if there's anything that can be done to get us out of this truthiness or post-truth era that we seem to be in right now, this fact-free era where people care more about how they feel rather than on what's true. Jay, start us off if you would.
No.
That is succinct, I'll give you that. Did you want to add to that at all?
I don't. People have been asking me, Jay, do you have any solutions? I think it's much more important that we spend this time after this shock trying to understand the problems first. I don't think we do yet. Like an example would be, where is the demand for fake news coming from? Do we really understand that? I don't think we do. So before we jump to here's the solution, here's what we should be doing, I think we have to spend a lot more time on understanding what happened here.
That's a great point, and maybe that's a future program for us. Craig, do you want to add to that?
I think to Jay's point, there's an incredible amount of complexity here. There's no one solution. There's a lot of different avenues where effort needs to be made. We've talked about Facebook a lot, and I think that is a really important element of this. Facebook has about 1.8 billion people logging in every month, and more than 1 billion doing it more often than that. It's less a company and it's less a social media platform than arguably one of, if not the most powerful stateless entities in the world. And it has tremendous power and tremendous influence. And I think that we do need to, make it accountable, and we do need to watch what Facebook tries to do now that it's faced so much pressure, because unintended consequences could be one of the things that comes out of this if they try to crack down too heavily. So I think keeping them accountable and watching them as one piece. I think journalists, particularly those covering Trump, need to step away from the world where we would simply, repeat the claims of famous and prominent people, even if they were factually baseless. And we need to be very clear and not repeat falsehoods, because that just creates more exposure for people. And the other piece is I do think in our education systems, we need to think about media literacy skills and critical thinking skills and how those are taught at every level and early on, because that's going to help arm people with their own abilities to sort through this stuff.
Zeynep, just briefly, anything you'd add to that list?
Well, I think a dual approach is necessary. Definitely Facebook and Google, and to some degree Twitter, have a very large role to play in our new media ecology, and they have to stop denying it, own it up, and kind of come on board having this discussion with accountability. And there has to be a parallel process that looks at what Jay was saying as a demand side, which is coming, yes, from long-standing cultural strains, but also a failure of politics and institutions for many people. And you have to understand that part too and see. The hard part is the chicken and egg thing, right? You have to fix the information ecology to try to build healthier institutions, but to build healthier institutions, you need that. So it has to be a lot of things at once, given the complexity.
John, let me put you back into where you were. If you were still running the Globe and Mail today and you saw this burgeoning problem of how do I get the vast population of this country to start to actually believe that which we report on a daily basis in spite of everything else they're hearing, where would you begin?
Well, I think Janice made an important point at the outset that a lot of great journalism outlets are doing really well right now. New York Times subscriptions have gone up since the election, so clearly there's a demand for quality journalism. So I would urge news organizations to continue to invest in that, to continue to convince consumers, the demand side, that this is worth paying for, that there's a value here, not that it's a social obligation, but there's a really important value proposition here from news. And the good organizations, that would include the Globe and Mail, the New York Times, will continue to be fine. I worry a lot more about the increasingly empty space in the middle, and we see that here in Canada, where there are many people who have lost contact, regular contact, with what we would call professional news outlets. and they're being fed by everything we've talked about.
Janice, I got 20 seconds left.
I would add to that. Actually, I think good journalism has to continue to be produced. I think part of the problem with not enough people believing in the excellent investigative journalism that was done in the U.S. was that it was going into a little bit of vacuum that the media itself had created. So if we recognize that, and in Canada, again, we're not going to be, don't want to be smug, that journalists have to understand the country better, have to understand wherever, the places where everybody
Get out of
lives
Toronto and Ottawa.
and get out of Toronto
Yeah.
and Ottawa. And they have to be supported by the media, and the media has to be encouraging and paying for that kind of journalism.
I want to thank everybody for appearing on our program on TVO tonight. Thanks so much for this. To Zeynep Tufekci. No, I said that wrong. Tufekci. There we go. Zeynep, thank you for being there for us from Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Thank you for inviting us.
Jay Rosen from NYU, Craig Silverman, founding editor, BuzzFeed Canada, both of them in New York City, John Stackhouse, formerly of the Globe, now the Royal Bank of Canada, Janice Neal, formerly of TVO, now the chair of the Ryerson School of Journalism. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.